Researcher notes. A story about wish fulfillment. Once I was vacationing in Vitiazevo and passionately wanted to see dolphins, but they never showed up. Then I decided to take a tour to sea fishing, hoping that I could meet them there, but that was in vain. As we were returning by boat, I shouted my wish loudly to the sea, and the people around me laughed at me. The next morning, however, when I arrived at the beach, I saw an incredible sight. 4 dolphins were swimming out of the depths of the sea. The water was up to my thigh, and one of the dolphins swam just a few centimeters away from me. I was so shocked and frightened that I squealed and ran out of the water. After this incident, for the rest of the vacation, did not see dolphins again. This case happened in 2010. I had an unusual dream. Jesus Christ stood by the roadside in one of the streets and looked at me with a stern look. I came there, ran and tried to find him, but he only glimpsed somewhere in the distance, dressed in dark-colored clothes. That same day, I went shopping with a friend in an unfamiliar neighborhood that we had never been to before. Before we went, I told her about my dream. We were standing at the checkout counter in a store, which was spacious, reminiscent of a supermarket, but simpler. I asked who, and she nodded at the wall next to us. There was a large portrait of Jesus Christ in dark colors, with the same stern gaze I had seen in my dream. I will tell you about an incident that happened to me. One day I was at home, washing dishes, and waiting for my husband to return from work. Suddenly, quite unexpectedly, I turned around, and as if I had risen above my own body, watching myself from above, I started frantically thrashing around the apartment, trying to find my husband. Out loud I said, "Where are you? I've searched the whole house. I know you should be home." And then she added, "Meow." It felt like I was in the wrong apartment. Everything around me was familiar, but at the same time completely foreign. It was the first time I had ever seen this wallpaper. The couch, the carpet, the dishes, and more. Nothing of my own. In panic, I kept looking for my husband, crying and thrashing around the rooms. From helplessness and not understanding where I was, I sat on the couch, sobbed, and stared at the wall in front of me, trying to calm myself down with thoughts that everything would be okay. After a few minutes, I started to gradually recognize my things. The wallpaper, the couch, the carpet, and so on. I continued to cry until finally my husband came home. I told him everything that had happened, but we still couldn't figure out what it was. I want to share another story that demonstrates the power of thought. I'm not sure if it was clairvoyance, foresight, or the materialization of a wish. When I was 8 years old, I was vacationing at a summer camp, and, for some unknown reason, the other kids refused to play with me. I was resentful and even angry. In a moment of irritation, a clear vision appeared before my eyes. If we went to play in the garden, where adults are forbidden to go, we would find on the fence a bag with soft toys, turbo gum, fancy, foxy glasses, and captain's binoculars. The idea seemed amazing to me, and I suggested that the kids become treasure hunters. They agreed, although I had never been to this garden before and realized that it was unlikely that there would be a real treasure there. I hoped that if we didn't find anything, I could come up with an excuse like, the treasure was stolen and the kids would at least play with me a little. Imagine my surprise when, 5 minutes later, we found a bag on the fence with the very things I had seen in my imagination. The kids were happy and I was in a state of shock. Later, the adults took the items away, but I still can't understand how I was able to predict an event that later happened in real life. The order-get method works for me all the time, especially when I am traveling by car with my husband, behind the wheel and me next to him. Every time we notice traffic police officers from afar, I send them rays of love. At the same time, I imagine a golden ray coming from the center of my chest, directed towards these guys, and mentally feel the kindest feelings for them. Acceptance, compassion, wishing them every good. I have been practicing this for about 3 years now, and we have never been stopped. The method works perfectly. It is as if the traffic police do not notice our car. Only once did I fail to notice them in time. They were standing around the corner. We turned right, and they immediately waved their baton at us. I usually tune in to them in advance. My beam works for 5 seconds, and that's enough. I recommend everyone to try this method. I live in Germany, and not far from our house, there was a small store selling household goods and groceries. The store worked even on weekends, and there was a young man working there, kind and helpful. But one day, he died suddenly. After only a month, the store was closed. At the entrance, they arranged a makeshift altar. They put a photo of the guy, left letters, lit candles that burned around the clock. People came to honor his memory, brought flowers, cleaned up autumn leaves. Someone quietly cried nearby. One day, I was walking with my 3-year-old son, who was sitting in a stroller. There was no one ahead. The street was deserted. Suddenly, my son pointed his finger at a closed bench and said,
"Whoa!
"Uncle is standing there." I instantly turned down a neighboring street. It was clear who he meant, but the thought that it could happen again made me fearful. Now I try to avoid those places, especially when I'm alone. Let me share my story that happened just yesterday. I am still under a strong impression. It has to do with the theme of the power of intention. At work, I needed to move some boxes of materials from one floor to another. The boxes weren't too heavy, but carrying them at the same time was awkward. I thought, I wish someone would help me. I took one box and went. At that moment, a young man was coming up the stairs. A helper flashed through my mind, but I wasn't even going to ask him for help. And then he called out to me and offered his support. I was so confused that I replied, "Thanks, I'm fine." I could have written it off as a coincidence, but the young man looked at me intently and asked, "Are you sure?" I declined to help, but then as I walked on, I began to think about why I had done it. It seems that the young man himself, who outwardly resembled an angel in some ways, was a little surprised. At work, it's lunchtime, the queue is gigantic in the canteen. I see the door open and my flatmate walks in. He looked around and walked out. In the evening, when we met at home, I asked him why he came in and didn't even say hello. And the neighbor says he was somewhere else at that time, although I clearly saw him, both clothes and face. I had a case. I was riding my bicycle late, in a hurry. Suddenly, a car with a trailer came out of the street from the right. I flew onto that trailer, saw the horrible hook of that trailer, and realized that I wouldn't be able to brake. All of a sudden, a strange sensation came over me, like it was all happening in a dream. Then it went dark for a couple seconds, and it was like I blacked out. When I woke up, the car with the trailer was behind me. I couldn't go around it, I could only fly over it. Who picked me up and carried me meters away from death, I still don't know, but it was. My experience with the passage of time occurred when I was delivering my middle son in the labor and delivery room. The doctors accidentally injected me with too high a dose of labor-stimulating medication, which caused the contractions to become much more intense and painful than usual. They repeated at regular intervals, and every time a new contraction started, I couldn't help but scream. There was a clock on the windowsill, and I watched it with dread, afraid that another wave of pain would start. But something strange began to happen. The minute hand on the clock suddenly began to move with incredible speed, as if it were a second hand. This continued for the rest of the first stage of labor until the pushing stage began. In those few hours, I lost 10 pounds and my throat became very sore. This happened in 2005, and I still remember the abnormal speed at which time flowed. But I still can't understand what exactly happened then. From the point of view of esoteric teachings in this case, you slowed down in time with the help of your consciousness. Your assemblage point has shifted to the right relative to the central axis of your body. The assemblage point is an energy center, where about 70% of your energy is located. If you have your own thoughts, please write in the comments. I recall the events of long ago, 2004, August, on the 23rd. The thunderstorm at night was so powerful that it seemed like the end of the world. The downpour came with a force I had never seen before. The wind howled, the thunder rumbled deafeningly, and the lightning bolts dazzled with their light. During one of these bright flashes, I noticed an old woman walking down the street. In spite of the noise of the rain, her clacking footsteps were clearly audible. But then the lightning went out, and it was as if the old woman didn't exist, even though she stood out so clearly in the middle of the night. White shawl, blue skirt, and red blouse. It was a marvelous moment. By the way, in dark streets at night, it's interesting to photograph with flash. Strange, almost infernal entities often appear around objects. It's a pity that the photo of my son in front of our house at that time was not saved. There was something to look at. I've recently had two unusual situations involving what appear to be different realities. The first story happened to a friend of mine. In my version of events, she was making dolls at her dacha, a boy and a girl. For the girl, she had ready-made clothes since she has a granddaughter. However, there were no clothes for the boy doll. I had some baby clothes left over from my grandson, who had already grown up, so I decided to offer them to my friend. I brought her a shirt, overalls, and even some wool to make hair. Later, when I mentioned these items to her, the friend claimed that nothing of the sort had ever happened. She began to claim that she had never done such crafts, which caused bewilderment and slight tension between us. We began to accuse each other of forgetfulness, citing age, although it might have seemed like a simple misunderstanding if it weren't for the second incident. The second episode happened to another friend of mine. Her children worked in Korea for a while, and one day they sent her an unusual hat with a built-in mask, which was relevant to the famous events. A friend even sent me a picture of that hat. Recently, I remembered her and mentioned this gift. However, my friend replied that she never had such a hat. I, on the other hand, distinctly remember her showing me the photo, and it got me thinking. It turns out that in my reality, this hat existed, but in hers it didn't. After the second time, I realized that we were once again facing some sort of different realities. I realized that we were facing something like different realities again, especially the idea that we might be transported somewhere else, and I didn't want to go to a new branch of life.